Thank you very much. Namaste, everyone. Thank you especially to Author and me, your entire team, and the curators, of course, and Ekta especially. It's very nice to be here because I can, with certainty, say that I'm amongst people who like to hear stories and to tell stories. And Ekta, I just picked up your book downstairs, and I think it resonates with me as well, you know, The Tribe of Warrior Women. And that's what my book, Mountain Goddesses, is about. But before I talk about that, because this session especially is a session very important for me because it sort of speaks to me and speaks to my journey as an author. I had begun writing, so I was a writer 2015 onwards. I had begun writing, and I had started writing especially on socio-political issues. I come from Jammu and Kashmir in India. And once I was done with singing The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round, my children had grown up, I thought it's time to do what really, really appeals to me, that seed in me. And I started writing socio-political articles for the largest selling English daily in Jammu and Kashmir back home in a regional paper. What was interesting is I anyways have a very gender confusing name. In India, Manu is usually a male. So every time I sent an article to the publisher, to the newspaper, I would get a thank you, Mr. Manu. Again and again and again, even after correcting, I was getting Mr. Manu. And that's when I started wondering if it was very strange for women in my region to write on socio-political issues, to like politics, to discuss politics, to think about social issues. Because there was an absolute lack of acceptance of a woman writing these things. I started researching and I saw that, yes, this particular paper was not publishing too many opinion editorials by women. So that started my journey. I started thinking, what's happening? Can I find empowered women role models, especially women whom I identified with, whom I could relate to, from my region, who spoke like me, who had an accent like me, who dressed like me, who ate like me? Were there stories of such women? Were they politically active? Were they socially active? Or were they relegated to only certain spaces? When this journey started, I realized that especially for India and for my region, the Jammu region, you could not just look at textual sources to find these women. I come from a people who are basically warriors. Being a frontier region, they have been busy fighting wars. So much so that they've forgotten to document so many things. So looking for these sources was extremely difficult. You could not pick up a text. You had to go through like maybe 20 books to come out with one small idea and understand what the society looked like, what was happening. At that point, I think, that's when I realized that there was more than a writer in me. There was an author also somewhere. That seed was there. Because to do this kind of reading, it's called contrapuntal reading, which is like you go beyond the textual sources and you look for these stories in various forms. It could be in folklores, it could be in music, it could be in dance. You have to look there. Probably my sari today, it has a story because it's Madhubani, it's an art form, and you basically paint stories. Before this, I was actually debating whether I should wear a Baluchari sari, and that again is a textile which tells stories. You have stories from the Hindu Itihasa, Ramayana and Mahabharata actually woven into this sari. So these are the kind of sources one had to look into to find these empowered women voices. And that's when I came, this is really close to my heart because this has been the basis of my book, Mountain Goddesses, which has been published by a UK-based publication, Tattva Press, and I believe Vidhu was here in the first session speaking about that. And thank God for Author and me and Tattva, because that is where the diversity comes in. So when I started looking at these texts, rather the oral traditions, when I started exploring the oral traditions, I realized that these voices of empowered women were all around me. I had probably been told to do certain rituals, and there was a story of a woman there, and I did not realize it because the story was told in such a manner that it had not struck a chord with me. I had listened to it, I had practiced a certain tradition very mechanically. And I have a young teenage daughter. So I thought I've got to pass on these stories to her. And if I do not tell these stories in the way she understands them, which fit into her worldview, these stories will be lost. And these are stories which go away 100 years back. So that's when I started doing my research. And there is this very, very quaint, charming practice in Jammu region called Dati worship. These are women, ordinary women, whose stories or their journeys are so extraordinary that they've been deified. They've been elevated to the status of a Devi. But these are ordinary women. And they are remembered. Look how stories are kept alive. They are remembered through either shrines dedicated to them, or there are fairs around, annual fairs around these shrines, where this Devi or this woman who was extraordinary is celebrated. So in this context especially, for me it was striking because as I was sharing that I was writing on socio-political issues, I realized that feminist philosophical scholarship in the West began in the 1970s. But in India, this was almost prehistoric. It was coming from thousands of years. You had these women. And in different ways and forms, they had a voice. They had a say in what was happening around them. So my book, Mountain Goddesses, is distributed, or I've divided the book in three sections. One is Dati worship, which I will come to. But the first section actually deals with Shakti shrines, which looks at all these manifestations of Adi Shakti, the supreme feminine divine in the Vedic culture. And the stories are amazing. They could relate to climate change. She could be a campaigner. That Devi could be a campaigner for save the forests and save the animals. Because I'll give you an example. There is a particular Devi called Sukrala Mata in the hills of Jammu. Absolutely picturesque locales. And she is the owner of the forests around. She's also the protector of the animals in this forest. She is so powerful that she's said to have punished 2 kings from Himachal Pradesh, the neighboring state today, for having hunted in her forest. So when I tell this story to my daughter like this, that look, this is what she was doing. She's a protector of the forests. She's actually an animal rights activist. This is what Sukrala Mata is. And instantly my daughter could connect. Then Dati worship. Dati are basically, as I said, they've been women, ordinary women who have been deified, but they are either clan deities or they are village deities, Gram Devis. And I have one. My family has a Gram Devi. And many of them are women because, as Ekta, you've also written in your book, that the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, have equal space. There is no contest in dharmic traditions. There is no fight for equality because they are equal and they are complementary. So when I looked at my own Gram Devi, and she's like the boss of the village. When I was getting married, the first wedding card had to be given to her. When the first harvest happens, it has to be brought to her little shrine, and the entire community comes. They may have moved out of the village, but they come back to the village. They share a feast, a community feast. And interestingly, I was later told that if somebody in that clan doesn't have enough, quietly and anonymously, that harvest is shared with that family in particular. So see, a lot of things are happening here. She is also the role model for community cohesion. She's keeping the community together. So I might be sitting here in London, but I go back for that annual feast to bow down before her. It's also a reflection on the society because this, as I said, my community is a warrior community who's fought they're known as the masters of mountain warfare. They've fought in Hunza and they've fought in Ladakh and they've fought at 15,000 feet and won these battles. And yet, there are these greatest of warriors like General Zorawar Singh, for example, who have bowed down to this supreme feminine divine. How powerful is that? For me, it was a reminder this is where I'm coming from. And if I know my history, I know my legacy, I know where to go. Let me give you a few examples of these Dati, which I mentioned because they are very interesting. And through the entire region, They are these little shrines. The region is dotted by them, not just Adi Shakti shrines, but these Dati shrines. And when I was looking for a role model, or where I was looking for somebody whom I could identify with, I was wondering if there was somebody who was a social activist, because there were long-suffering lovers who had been made into Datis because they had made the supreme sacrifice. There were grieving mothers who were Dati. But I was a social activist, so where do I find a Dati who was that? And I found her. And I'll give you an example quickly. So many of these stories of ordinary women rising to extraordinary stature against injustice existed. There was the Dati of Dabbuj in Samba Tehsil in Jammu, who died during her fight against the atrocities committed by Lal Pal, who was a rich businessman. Then there is another, Bua Bhaga, she's known as. She lived in the Bilawar Tehsil, again a very beautiful Tehsil. If I can sell Jammu region to you, you must go and visit. And her life is a testimony of rebellion against autocracy. So she fought because she was protesting certain tax system. Now there was Bua Bhaga, and Bua Bhaga also was protesting against some taxation system, and she had died while fighting the soldiers of this particular king. So these women, for me, when I read about them, I can't tell you how excited I was. I thought it's only natural for me to be like this, to speak up for my region, to talk about what my people are feeling, what their stories are. I had to tell these stories. I mean, I had become an activist because I felt there were not too many articulate female voices from my region. And by God's blessings, I had gone through a medium of education which allowed me to speak and write in English in a pretty decent manner, which is not the case for my region. That's not their first language. It's not a natural language they think or talk in. So I thought, let me use this skill. And similarly, when I read these stories, I thought these stories need to be told because they need to survive. They need to be preserved and promoted. And also because they can be that role model for so many of our girls and boys, adults, who are looking for such role models across cultures. I'm not saying these are the only role models, but these are some of these role models from my culture, from my region, which have not been spoken about, which people haven't heard. So these are the many, many Datis that I saw, and I'll quickly read a paragraph before I finish. While doing my research, and let me tell you that these oral traditions, as I said, are in music art form, and especially in Jammu region, there is a system of ballad writing which is called kardaks. So many of these kardaks or these ballads have the stories of these amazing women. And I finally managed to hear a ballad, and I thought, where was I and why didn't I hear of this before? And I read a paragraph. This is from my book because I have sort of written about that ballad. But basically this is Kishtwar, another very beautiful district in Jammu region, full of mountains and very thick forests. And at that time, this is about 525 AD, and there is this king called Raibhan. And Raibhan, and he is about to go into battle with the enemy king. So Raibhan, along with his ministers, came to Chaugan. Chaugan is a lovely field in Kishtwar. It still stands today, surrounded by majestic mountains, because Jammu region lies in the shadows of the Shivaliks and the Pir Panjal range. So Raibhan, along with his ministers, came to Chaugan to address the youth who were roaring to go to battle and defend Kishtwar. Just then, tearing through this crowd of male warriors, emerged a young girl. Her face radiant and eyes shining fiercely, she carried a flag with the image of goddess Durga on it. She carried a trishul, trident, in one hand and a spear in the other, and she waved above her head. Her black tresses fell beyond her hips. The black sash around her narrow waist looked like a hissing serpent. She seemed to be dancing in the air and raring to go. Raibhan felt as if Chandika, Mahakali, herself had appeared before them. And I was like, where were these stories? They were there, but a layer of dust had gathered, which needed to be cleaned. For me, this became my source, and this became the backdrop of my first book, which has been published and is going to be launched very soon, Mountain Goddesses. But this became a part of my soul. This was my calling. I felt that I belonged to a tribe of warrior women. And I realized that there was this tribe, they preceded me. And these oral traditions especially capture not just our ancestry, our ancient past, but also the way our people think, the way our people worship. And it was beautiful and it had to be shared to the world. That's why I wrote Mountain Goddesses. And that's the store evolution, wonderful term coined by author in me. This was my journey, and I thought it fit so well in your session, Ekta, Monica, that I'm glad that I got this opportunity to speak about it. I hope you could relate to it. I hope you will be more interested in finding out about not just this book, but more such stories which haven't been told and are waiting to be told. So thank you so much for giving me this time. I know you have sort of overrun your sessions, so I'll end it here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take afterwards. But thank you for giving me such a patient hearing. Namaste.